So this happened just before my 20th birthday, when I was in the United States Navy. I was stationed at a naval school in South Carolina for pretty much the entirety of my enlistment, close to Charleston, but not actually in the city. It wasn't uncommon for us with cars to drive down into the city, and everyone was friends with someone with a car. Me and my class leader, who was 22, we'll call him P, were awfully close. He was also friends with this 19-year-old New Yorker that I didn't like too much. We'll call him T. T had a car though, so we ended up having to stick together quite a lot. One night, after all three of us had tanked a very important test, I convinced them to go for some ice cream to cheer up. We decided to go to this little mom-and-pop style shop on the far side of Charleston, and we all piled into T's truck. After we had grabbed our ice cream, P went to start giving T directions, since he couldn't find his way out of a damn shoebox. T, though, insisted he knew this special shortcut, and all we needed to do was just enjoy the ride. It wasn't like we had anything early the next day anyway, so I figured, why the fuck not? It'll probably just be a funny story later when T inevitably gets us all lost. So there we are, driving for at least twice as long as it should have taken to get back to base, but T keeps on promising that we're almost there. Meanwhile, we hadn't seen a single building in 10 miles. The road was so dark, it was almost like looking out into the abyss. At this point, T casually mentions that he has to pee, so P and I tell him to just pull over, take a leak real fast, and do his business. The road was lined with forest anyway, so he had plenty of options to save his dignity. For some reason though, he insisted on pulling all the way off-road. T finds this random dirt road and turns down it. P and I both glance at each other and say that he needs to stop right now. We were both from the South, while T had grown up mostly in New York. We both knew how real shoot first and ask questions later could be out this deep. T, though, kept saying he was just gonna go a little bit further through the trees. At this point, all I could think about was how we're all going to get shot just because I wanted to get some ice cream when we broke through the tree line. About 20 yards in front of us was a big bonfire, so bright compared to the light from the new moon. Immediately, my stomach dropped. P and I both started yelling at T to turn around right now. And that's when we noticed that the figures around the fire had now turned and were glancing at us. They started to close in. T was like frozen in the driver's seat, so I reached into the front and put the car in reverse, hitting him repeatedly in the shoulder. T turned around to check behind him and make sure the way was clear, only for him to freeze up once again. I turned around too, and saw even more figures closing down on the trail behind us. P, by now, had pulled out a flashlight and was trying to blind the figures, repeatedly telling T to go right now. We needed to get out of here. Slowly, he started to make his way back, while P was flipping his flashlight around in the highest setting. I was making sure all the doors were locked, and rolling up all the windows as well. I even closed the back sliding window. As we backed up, the crowd slowly parted around us, like we were Moses and they were the Red Sea. We made it back onto the road without any further problems, thankfully. We made the rest of the ride in almost complete silence, and the three of us never spoke about it since that day. The only thing that was said on the ride home was when P turned to me and whispered that all of those people were wearing masks. So, this story is going to be partially from my perspective as well as from my brother's to get the full story. It happened just last night, while I was at my grandma's house. Before this all took place, I went to get McDonald's in the city nearest to us, which is about 20 minutes away. After that, I decided to go down to my grandma's house, instead of going straight home. For some context, she lived down a long farm road, which you also had to turn off down a half-mile dirt driveway to get to her house. I arrived there at around 9 p.m., and I went in and visited with my grandmother and my brother. My brother lived there with her ever since my grandpa had passed away. We didn't want her to have to live all that far out all alone. My brother and I took out my grandma's dog to go to the bathroom at around 10:30 and just sat outside together listening to music and talking. At that point, it was starting to get a bit cold. This was East Texas. I was not quite used to it getting down to the low 40s at night, so I was just about ready to head inside. All of a sudden, though, I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye near the large metal shop that sat a few hundred yards from the house. I didn't really take too much notice, though. It wasn't too uncommon for deer or raccoons to come snooping around in the yard at night. Plus, my grandma's dog wasn't barking or anything. Maybe it was even my eyes playing tricks on me so late at night. We finally headed back inside, and my grandma went to sleep at around 11 p.m. My brother and I stayed up and played some Among Us and watched YouTube for a while. At around 2:30 a.m., I was finally tired and ready to go home, so I asked my brother to walk with me to the door and make sure I got out to my car all right. I was always pretty paranoid, especially at night. He joked around and said he would turn the light off on me and lock the door. I freaked out and begged him to walk me out to the car, to which he finally humored me. I hopped in my car, locked all the doors, and saw the porch lights turn off as I was driving back down the dirt road. I'd gotten home within 10 minutes and fixed myself some ice cream before I sat down, and I started watching some creepy horror stories on YouTube. After about 15 minutes or so, though, I got a FaceTime call from my brother, which I picked up right away. This was quite unusual. I could tell right away he was freaked out about something. He wasn't saying anything at first, though, so I asked him what was wrong. He told me that just after I'd left, he went back outside to continue listening to music and enjoy the sitting on the porch. He had the music on his phone up pretty loud, which would usually mask any noises of animals coming from the nearby woods. After a few minutes of listening, though, he heard what sounded like metal banging around, so he paused the music and listened to see if he could hear a little bit better. He stood up and looked toward the shop and boat shed, which were adjacent to each other. He could see a faint light shining around the boat bed, then it quickly flicked off. At this point, he was freaking out, so he quietly crept back inside the house and locked the door behind him. I guess he didn't think to wake our grandma. He just ran and grabbed his revolver instead. He ran back outside, only to see the glow of a flashlight moving around, then shutting off immediately as he'd noticed it. He walked out to the edge of the concrete carport and stared out toward the boat shed with his revolver by his side. The only thing illuminating the boat shed now was the faint light coming from the house. He tried his best to muster up the most intimidating voice he could manage and called out into the night, "Who the hell is out there?" There was no immediate reply. Instead, there was a slight bumping sound, which solidified the fact that someone was indeed out there in the darkness. Keep in mind, this was out in the middle of country, in a town with a population of just over 1,000. The nearest house was all the way across the lake, or miles and miles down that farm road. No well-meaning person would just happen to stumble across my grandma's house this late at night. There had also been many times recently where people had been snooping around my grandma's property, so this was not something we could take lightly. For the life of me, I can't tell you why my brother didn't just call the police. You have to remember, I guess, that there's literally only one cop for our entire town, and it was 3 a.m. as well. It would take at least an hour for him to even show up. My brother again called out for the person to show themselves and repeated his question. He said that he'd practically shit his pants as a tall, lanky figure slowly emerged from the boat shed with a flashlight in hand. Although my brother couldn't see any distinct features about this person, he could definitely tell it was an older man, and it was not someone from the town. It was especially not someone that should be in our boat shed at 3 a.m. At this point, he raised the revolver up to point at the man and shouted again, "Who the fuck are you?" The man was silent once more and began to walk menacingly toward him. My brother pulled back the hammer of the revolver and gave one last verbal warning to the man. "I swear I'll blow your fucking head off. Tell me who you are and why you're here." The man raised his hands up and said in a mocking voice, "Whoa, calm down, man. He continued to walk toward my brother. My brother fired a single shot just beside the man, to which he finally took that as his cue my brother was serious. The man hurriedly took off on foot back down the driveway, and my brother screamed, "Next time, I won't miss!" My brother ran inside to wake up my grandma, who had somehow slept through the entire commotion, including the gunshot. She didn't seem worried enough to actually call the police, but of course, after hearing this, all I could think was, what were the true intentions of that man? Just a meth head snooping around to steal some tools for drug money? Or something more sinister? Another question that haunts me about this whole situation is how many times had this happened after my grandma and brother went to bed and we just hadn't known? Was he watching me as I walked out to my car? What would have happened if my brother had actually turned out the lights, locked the door, and not walked me to my car? This happened to me when I was going to school in Los Angeles in the spring of 2012. I grew up in Indiana in a very safe community, so it took quite a while for me to adjust to the craziness and crime of the city, although this incident really changed my behavior forever. At the time, I was living in an apartment with 4 other women at my college. Our place was right above a house, so to access it you had to go along an alley right next to it, up some stairs, and out of the way pretty much. This one day, I was running home real quick to grab some music before choir, and was putting my music together on the kitchen table. I didn't bother to lock the door, since I was only going to be there for a few minutes. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the screen door. I looked up, only to see a man standing there, looking in. I called out something like hello, thinking the man must be here to deliver a package or something. That's basically the only kind of traffic we'd ever get up to our apartment door. The man didn't say anything. Instead, he reached down and twisted open the screen door, which I just remembered was still unlocked. The man was a medium-height, youngish Hispanic man in a t-shirt and jeans. Basically looked just like any guy you'd see all over LA. He still didn't say a word. He walked over to me at the kitchen table. I was a little bit alarmed, starting to say he could just leave his package on the table, when I noticed he did not have a package. The only thing in his hand was a small plastic container, which as I was watching, he flicked out the blade of a box knife. At this point, he reached my seat and put the blade up against my neck. I finally realized this man was not here for a package. He was here to hurt me. With the blade held firmly against my neck, he told me to get up and walked me into the bedroom next to the kitchen, which was my roommate's. He turned and locked the bedroom door and threw me to the bed, all while holding the knife against my throat. My mind was racing. I tried to tell myself that he probably just wanted to rob us, and I just let him take whatever he wanted. As I was sitting on the bed, he started looking around and grabbed some phone cables next to it. He began trying to tie my wrists with them. It was not working very well, but he kept on trying. I realized that if he succeeded, this would become a lot scarier for me. I distinctly remember in that moment deciding I'd rather be stabbed by a 1-inch box knife than be raped or worse. I screamed, pushed him away, and sprinted for the door. The man caught me and threw me down, and again tried to tie my hands with the cords. I was screaming for real now though, and began smacking at his head with my hands. After a few moments of this, he decided to bail instead. He sprinted out the front door and out of my apartment. I followed the man, screaming for help to the alley behind the house. One of the people who lived in the house underneath our apartment came out within seconds and saw the guy running down the alley. He chased him out into the street. We called the cops together and they came super quickly and took my statement multiple times. We actually went down to the station, where I worked with a police artist on a drawing that they posted on TV. They caught that guy within the same week, and I believe he went to jail for several years. The local police officer who responded to the scene said a local gang required new members to bring the nipples of a white woman when they wanted to join. That was his guess of what this guy wanted. Now, I always tell people to lock their doors no matter how quickly they'll be leaving, or how safe they feel. People are always looking for easy opportunities to take advantage, even of a split second. First off, I suppose I'll give some backstory. When I was younger, I worked for my lake community during the summer season, for about as long as I can remember. The jobs ranged from anything from dishwasher, maintenance worker, boat tender. My last job, and the longest one, was beach security. The lake had this small beach with a building that had a game room, a deck overlooking the beach, a restaurant, a small motel, and a lobby for guests of the hotel and restaurant. I was assigned to check in the guests of the beach and make sure they were members in good standing who paid their community dues as well. I also had to enforce the rules beset upon the whole area. As you can imagine, I would get quite a lot of flack at this job from Karens, crusty teens, and other idiots who were up there for the summer. It came with almost as much drama as you might see on a CW teen drama show. This story took place during the summer and fall of 2011. I had graduated college at this point and promised myself this would be my last year of doing this work. I was so tired of the drama, and I was ready to find a real job now. To bank some more money this year, I also took the position of doing night duty on beach security. For this, I would monitor the property for 3 more hours after the game room and restaurant closed at 11 p.m. and make sure nobody was trespassing during the night. This mostly meant I just walk the property, stay in the lobby area, watch some TV, and play my Nintendo DS until my shift was over. 98% of the time, it would come and go by real fast, but sometimes I'd see the occasional deer, raccoon, fox, or black bear walking on the deck. I would also have to occasionally ask people to leave or call community security for assistance. I was an unarmed security guard, and I didn't have any weapons or anything for self-defense at the time of this story. One night in July, I was watching Adult Swim on the TV with a sliding glass door behind me that led to the deck. The show that I was watching went to commercial break, and the screen went black. As this happened, I noticed in the reflection of the TV screen, someone appeared to be standing on the deck behind me, looking into the door at me. Immediately, I jolted up and turned to this figure. I just stared at him. There was a 5'8" man wearing a dirty black hoodie with a white Adidas logo on it, navy blue basketball shorts, and white sneakers. He had his hood up all the way, and I couldn't make out his face at all. I could tell he appeared to have red dyed hair underneath his hood though, and seemed to be a bit younger than I was. He was just standing there, swaying back and forth with his hands in his pockets. He was staring at me, but it was almost like he was looking through me. I took a second to collect myself, then I walked to the glass door and talked through it. Hello, sir. I'm sorry, but the beach and deck are closed for the night. I'll have to ask you to leave the property and come back when we're open in the morning."
"And when would that be?"
He was very monotone and seemed tired and jittery. That would be at about 8 o'clock, I believe."
"Okay, well, can I come in and use the bathroom for a moment?"
At this point, I felt something much more off about this guy. I had dealt with drunks and people being super high, but this guy seemed to be on something else that I didn't want any part of. I'm sorry, but no one's allowed in here unless they're a guest of the hotel or restaurant, which are both closed for the night. If you could, sir, please vacate the beach." He seemed a bit annoyed in his voice, but his body language barely changed.
"Fine, I guess I'll go somewhere else."
He then walked off. I made it a point to follow him off the deck and watch him walk away to make sure he left. Instead of heading up the road, though, he veered off into the woods. He was out of sight, but I could hear him dragging his feet through the brush and sticks. After that, I walked back into the lobby and locked the door behind me. I called dispatch and reported the incident and asked them to keep an eye out for this guy. 2 o'clock swiftly came by, and I locked everything up. I armed the security system and left. I started to drive out of the beach area. As I started to turn left, a balloon full of red liquid flew from the woods and slammed against my passenger side window. I got startled and floored it out of there. I wasn't going to get out and see what had just happened. I only lived 5 minutes away anyway. I got home and checked the damage. My passenger door was covered in red paintball paint. The impact had been enough to actually put a dent in it. I called this in and asked them to keep their eyes out and check the area for suspicious persons. The next day, I was told they hadn't seen anybody there, but I did get reports of the same thing happening to other residents' cars and houses throughout the night. I was pissed off and also unnerved that this had happened in the first place. Time passed by though, and now it was fall. The beach had closed for the season, but they still needed a night guard to make sure no one vandalized the property. It was the week of Halloween, and it was also my last night there. I'd gotten a job working at a much better place with better pay. I had also put in my last 2 weeks' notice. I went to a Halloween party during the day and went out as Jason Voorhees with a machete from Walmart as well. I was wrapping up for the night, sitting outside my car and talking my friend's ear off on my cell phone. As I was talking though, I began to hear leaves rustling and twigs snapping in the woods behind the dumpster. I told my friend I had to go and hung up. I guess this was my dumb white person in a horror movie moment because I walked slightly closer to where the noise was coming from. It was dark, but slightly lit from the parking lot's lights. As I was looking, from behind the dumpster emerged that very same guy I'd seen in July. His hood was down still, and I could see his hair had grown much longer. He began to swiftly walk up to me, growling, his face plastered with rage. He had a black iron pipe in his right hand and swung it as he came at me. He covered a lot of ground quickly. I dodged and ran to my car. I threw open my back passenger side door I was facing and grabbed the machete. I raised it over my head and stood my ground as bravely as I could. I don't remember what I said to the man. I was filled with so much adrenaline I was throwing out curses non-stop. The man seemed to stop and gauge our positions. I yelled and shook the machete a bit more. He simply turned around and disappeared back into the woods where he'd come from. As soon as he cleared the dumpster, I got the hell out of there. I was going way too fast for the winding roads my community had. I called not only security, but the police as well. Of course, by the time they got there, he was nowhere to be seen yet again. 4 years later, I moved away from my community and hadn't heard anything new about the man or anything related to the incident either. I now carry a knife on me at all times, and I still have that same lucky machete in my car, just in case. My family is from a small southern town. They've always lived around here, and in the early 70s, it was the kind of place where everyone knew all their neighbors. My grandpa owned his own grocery store. It was called Bill's Food Center. Everyone in town would come by regularly and grab their groceries, even stay and chat a while with us for a little bit. My mom had worked the cash register regularly from her early teens on, so she knew all the regulars and could always tell when someone hadn't been there before. This meant that when 2 men came in that she'd never seen in town before, she made sure to welcome them and asked if they needed any help finding anything. She told me she remembered being very unnerved by them from the very beginning. She repeated herself and asked if they needed any help. The older one replied, "Nah, sweetie, we'll let you know when we find what we need." As they checked out, the older man, who she described as mid to late 30s, kept asking her increasingly personal questions. She was polite, of course, but tried to give vague, general answers. The younger man that was with him was in his early 20s or so, and never spoke a word, always just followed what the other person said. After that, they started to come in every day, for about 4 days or so. They always unnerved her because they seemed to be looking after her specifically. She never felt too threatened or weirded out until the very last day they came in, though. The older man said he could use some help now and explained that they were going on a camping trip and needed some help picking out some supplies. He said they needed some really strong rope and some duct tape as well. He explained he liked to shoot guns and needed the duct tape to wrap around his hands while shooting or something. Of course, she felt that explanation was odd, but it's not like she could stop him from buying things. She helped him pick out the supplies and check them out as well. She got such bad vibes from them that day that when they left, she made sure to memorize their license plate just in case. Only a few days later, a cashier at another local store down the street from my grandpa's suddenly went missing. After searching for a few days, the police found her body near a local river. She had been beaten, sexually abused, tortured, and stabbed repeatedly. She was bound with duct tape, barbed wire, and rope, the exact same items exactly that my mom had sold the two men. When she read about the murder in the Sunday paper, her stomach dropped. She immediately felt she knew the two men were responsible. She told my grandpa this as well. She knew those two men were somehow involved. Of course, my grandpa was skeptical at first, but my mom was so adamant he eventually caved in, and they went to the police together. My mom was questioned extensively by the lead detective. It took quite some time, but the police eventually caught up with those men, and they were found guilty of that murder. My mom was so shaken up about the whole thing, she refused to work in the store alone from then on. She was even more alarmed when the police informed her that the men had been casing my grandpa's store before ultimately deciding to take the other woman.